Hey there, my friends. Welcome to an episode of Behind the Wheel. Well, I'm sitting out here in my car again because it's the quietest spot in the house. Perhaps not the quietest, but the least likely that I will be interrupted while I'm making a video by either people or sounds or obligations or whatever it might be. Generally, my kids are pretty self-sufficient until I'm doing something where I need quiet for a minute, but that's okay. And, that's what a parent does. And that's somewhat along the lines of what I wanted to make a video about here, which was coping with people, I guess. And I'm not quite sure how I'll title or define the video, but, we all have our own differences. We all have our own similarities. We have certain aspects of ourselves that we can relate to people on, and others not so much. And in our day-to-day activities, say we meet someone at work and they have a different outlook on life, we can overlook that. We can overlook our political views or opinions or even just maybe mood swings because we know how to function on a level that is workplace related, setting aside differences and basically embracing our mutual needs while we're on the job or whatever we do in our lives. Another example would be going on vacation, let's say, with a group of people, or let's say somebody takes a cruise. There's probably a million different points of view on that cruise ship, but you'll generally walk by and smile to people and have a great time. I would imagine, unless you eat the food. I guess using a cruise wasn't the best example, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that when it comes to family and those who are close to us, and family and close friends, it's not so easy to just overlook differences. And what happens is we build up resentments towards one another about having, let's say we have a different opinion. I didn't really think of how to structure this video, so let me start out with giving an example. If you have a good friend who maybe has a completely different political view than you, and which during the past election cycle, I'm sure this happened to a lot of people, and I've heard a lot of people saying that families and friends are, fighting and arguing about politics, which I find to be very useful, arguing itself, but letting it divide people that you love is completely preposterous and unnecessary. But there is an aspect of it to where if somebody else's, values don't resonate with you, then you're going to have differences of opinion. Anyhow, I was thinking that when you live with people, it's much different than just having friends that you have different views with. And mainly the focus I wanted to have here was on couples or anybody who's in a relationship with someone where you see each other day to day on a regular basis and have to find ways to understand each other. Now, my wife and I feel very fortunate, and I almost use the word lucky, but I almost despise it when people tell me I'm lucky because there's very little luck involved when you've been with someone for a long time. There's work that's put into it. There's a lot of effort. And I have a few friends who have gotten married and been divorced, and their experience has been one where they fell in love with someone that had completely different outlook on life, and both people in the relationship assumed that, maybe they'll change. And this is the biggest mistake that people make when they're getting into a relationship with someone, is to say, well, maybe I can change them. If that's the thought you have, then it just never works. You can say that I want to, help them to achieve their dreams or help them accomplish changing, but trying to change someone is just ludicrous. So when it comes to my wife and I, we both grew up listening to very similar things. And we met in 98, and we've been together ever since. So almost 20 years we've been together, and we didn't get married until 5 years ago. And all that time we were together, we had a great relationship, but we waited to get married because it wasn't the biggest priority. We didn't feel like we had to prove it to one another or to society. But we eventually did, merely because it was something we wanted to do. So after people get married, often this is when the real problems happen. People start to resent one another because they all of a sudden realize that they went from, say, being single to being with someone in this lustful relationship for maybe a year or less. And then they get married, and then they realize, oh my God, what did I just do? I set myself up for my entire life. And this may be a subconscious thought, but it becomes conscious in the way that we act towards one another. And often two people will end up forcing each other away, or pushing each other away, or kicking one or the other out through resentments and misdirected hostilities about other things we're anxious about. In other words, sometimes I've seen, say, women who will treat, their husbands like total crap and tell them, why don't you get your shit together? Oh, you need to get a career and a job. I have a good friend who left town because, he'd been living with his wife and he had that problem. She expected him to buckle down and be part of society, and, even though he was making money and he was getting by, he was working towards something greater. And it made me think back to when I was, unemployed and having a rough time. And rather than my wife berating me and treating me like crap and making me feel worse, she backed me up. She said, well, you can go to school if you want, or do this or do that. But the whole thing is that we're working together the whole time. Another example is like if we go, let's say, to a concert. We like to travel and go to events. And if something happens to us, maybe we get in, let's say, a car accident, or anything that might happen which, may cause some turmoil. We work together as a team to figure it out. And that may sound obvious, but I know a lot of people who, when something bad happens, they start yelling at each other and getting upset. I mean, some of the ways that couples talk to each other is just preposterous. And to each his own. I'm not here to judge. If a relationship's working fine for a person and they constantly, cuss and yell at each other, so be it. I have no idea what goes on in other people's minds and how they cope. But more often than not, I see that they're in an unhappy relationship, and don't even realize it. It's funny how, even though my wife and I have been together for so long, she still doesn't tell me what I should be doing or what I shouldn't be doing. She may say this is how she feels about something. And I'm the same way with her, but I've known friends whose girlfriends will tell them, make them feel like crap because, oh, you need to stop smoking cannabis now. Oh, you need to do this and you need to do that. And I've talked to several friends over the years who have had that problem and just gone along with it and actually believed that their woman was right. And I realize I'm using women as an example here, and that's because as a man, I've only talked to my guy friends who have had those issues, but there are just as many men out there who are just dogs about the way they treat their women. I've got to say this while it's on my mind. Any man who calls his wife ugly or fat or lazy or whatever it might be because he's upset with her or because he doesn't like the way she looks, whatever it might be, that is some of the most appalling behavior that I can imagine. The way that people talk to one another. Just to even suggest, to pick on someone that you love, even that you're married to or not, and make them feel bad because you're upset about something else. This is misdirection, and usually when people are berating each other and calling each other names, it's especially when it's from a very trivial situation, such as, Bob forgot to take the garbage out, so Margaret tells him he's a piece of shit and he's lazy, and then goes on this tangent about the shows he watches and going out with his friends, and hey, it doesn't mean that Bob doesn't deserve it. Maybe he's one of those guys that, works all day, then goes out drinking with his friends and comes home really late and doesn't spend any time with the kids or the wife, or maybe he's abusive or, spiteful, or, there are a million different attributes that a person can have that could upset another person. But I gotta say, we're all imperfect and we all have issues. it's really important that we work together to mend those issues instead of working against each other. Having children, it teaches you a lot about the types of things that adults do that were carried on from childhood that we don't even realize. And kids are really good at deflecting onto other things. They become upset about something else, and so, they find a way to be upset no matter what the situation is. And I gotta say, one of the biggest aspects to this is being able to control your emotions, which doesn't mean that you negate your emotions, and that's a crucial aspect. There are plenty of pills people can take out there, antidepressants, that neutralize your emotions. And they say, well, I'm not stressed out anymore. Hell, I'm not depressed anymore. Well, shit, I don't feel anything anymore. That's a problem. But a lot of folks think that their stress is so bad that it's worth losing the good emotion, but it's not, because those healthy emotions, I can wake up and sometimes I'll watch a show in the morning that just makes me cry, and that's what makes me happy. It makes me realize I'm human, that I'm still able to feel properly, which means that I'm not hiding my aggressions or anger. A lot of people will hide their aggressions or frustrations underneath either drug usage or deflecting and doing something else, maybe a hobby or something to take their mind off of it, but don't even realize how much they're upset with their loved ones. And I really think about it a lot, like, am I, what do I want from my future? And am I fooling myself in life, not just relationship-wise, but with everything? Am I settling for being happy at what I do for work because I don't want to work harder, or is it because I'm happy with what I have? And all the aspects, all the crucial elements to being human, I analyze as much as possible. And a lot of folks say, hey, don't overthink it. But when it comes to that, you really do have to think about it. It's like they say, everyone wants the answers, but they forgot what the question was. It reminds me of, it was the movie, which was it was a book. It was The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And the answer in the end, this machine, was asked the question about the answer to life. And in the very end, millions of years later, it came back with the answer to life, and it was 42. And nobody could remember what the question was. And that's it's kind of an interesting side note there, but actually the number 42 didn't just pop up in that book. It was it's considered a very holy number and sacred from a lot of cultures, but I won't even get into that right now. But the idea that we don't even know what the questions are anymore, and sometimes we get so frustrated we want to get answers to everything in life, and so when we're upset and we're not doing what we want to do, we can project our anger onto our loved ones, and that's very unhealthy. So I don't know what your situations are like, all of you out there. I mean, you may be a person who is in an abusive relationship. I mean, I've made videos talking about this stuff before, especially about abuse, and had people send me messages that said that, that they've been abused for a long time by someone they love, and it breaks my heart to hear that, because I think these are humans that have the right to live a happy life. And to all those who say, well, if you're being abused, just leave. I'm sorry, but that is very shallow and ignorant to think that a person can just walk away from a relationship that's abusive. People become attached to the people they love. And especially, let's say it's a wife who has a husband who's always worked and always provided, but he becomes abusive. And yeah, she could walk away, but then she has to start all over. And it's not that she can't, it's just that people don't believe that they can. They're beaten down physically and mentally sometimes so much that they don't believe that they're worthy. They start to believe the things that people are telling them. And it's easy to do. Anytime somebody says, some people can give you a dozen positive affirmations, but if a person gives you one negative one, you're going to think about that more. And I've looked into the psychology of that to say, why is it, that people are much more sensitive to, insults or to negative comments or criticism. And over the years, I know I have been. You know, like on YouTube, I learned a lot about the way people, behave and the way they try to criticize one another, and I can just let it roll off my back now. But, in the past, I didn't like criticism at all. But it doesn't necessarily matter from random people. But when it's from your wife or your friends or your family, and they tell you something bad about yourself, it's easy to go, I'm not like that. But I'm honest with myself when I look inside, and over the years I've come to the conclusion that yes, I can be a little overbearing in conversations, and sometimes I can be a little bit arrogant when I have a discussion. I need to learn to quiet myself and let other people explain themselves better so I understand where they're coming from before I make an assumption, let's say, about what their conclusions. And all these things I've been working on for the last, about the last 5 years. And so I'm consciously aware in a discussion, make sure that there's time for the other person. But in this, I've learned so much about, how people can get really defensive over something they don't need to get defensive about. And how many misunderstandings lead to insult. And it's just too bad. But the one thing I know, even though I'm self-critical and I'm aware of all my shortcomings, I know that I'm a nice person. I don't have to wonder about that. It takes a lot to really anger me. And it can only be done by the most ways by really being wronged by someone that I trust, which in my life has led me to not trust people as much. And over the years, I've become better at trusting again, but I was stolen from by good friends, like 3 times, the people that I had living with me, and I just continued to trust people. And over the years, there was a point where I didn't make new friends for a long time. And then I met my wife, and she is like my my rock, man. She is my partner, and I'm just so fortunate to have that. And I don't talk about relationships very often, but maybe that's because I'm happy in the one I'm in. And I just wish I could see more people in that situation to realize you don't have to fight. You don't have to hate each other. And you don't have to yell and scream and slam doors and deflect, because you are a team. And this isn't just for couples. This is for parents and children too. This is for friends. This is for friends of friends, We're group types people. We like to be in groups. We like to think with others, share with others, but have a hard time taking criticisms ourselves. So there's a fine balance between accepting criticism about yourself and saying, yes, that's true, but that's something I'm working on, and being the kind of guy who says, I have no problems at all, screw you, and being the kind of person who, when they're insulted, says, you're right, I'm a piece of shit, I'm a loser. And that's the opposite end of it. There's some people, if I try to criticize something in their life, they'll just say, oh, I know I'm garbage, I suck, I'm just useless. And so it's really sensitive. People are sensitive and have to be careful, about what we say around others. Because the language that I'm using, English, doesn't even halfway explain the thoughts that I'm trying to express in my mind even right now. But so I guess I'm going to go now. This video's getting pretty long, and get back inside and cook up some dinner. Vittles on the way. Have a wonderful evening, everybody.